One civilization rises and another must fall. With the eruption of Mount Thera, the Minoans' time at the top is now over. Well, I suppose you could say at least they went out with a bang and swish? Wash? Anyway, good morning, good afternoon, good evening to you lads and ladies around the world, and welcome back to Bronze Age Greece, where last time we left a now devastated Minoan civilization, quite literally swept from power in the Aegean by a combination of a devastating volcanic eruption and a subsequent tsunami, which left them nearly completely at the mercy of the now arriving Mycenaeans, who had migrated down the Greek mainland from the Balkans, bringing with them their Indo-European language, brand new culture, and also pointy things. The perfect recipe then for a great big cultural overthrow in the Aegean. But this did not happen instantly. Instead of going all arrows blazing with an all-out invasion of the Aegean islands, and subsequently Crete itself, the Mycenaeans first established themselves on the Greek mainland at sites such as Mycenae itself. This resulted in Crete and what was left of the Minoans subsequently being given a bit of breathing room after the disaster they had just endured. But their ability to project soft power by means of culture and trade was greatly diminished by the disaster, and in 1375 BCE, the Mycenaeans with their full strength were ready to put an end to the Minoan civilization, and with its juicy trade networks and obvious wealth, Crete was within the crosshairs of the Mycenaeans, who after trying and failing the soft power move over the Minoans themselves, opted instead for method number 2, invasion and destruction, and in 1375 BCE, Crete was invaded by the Mycenaeans, resulting in the destruction of several palace settlements on the Isle of Crete itself. Not even Knossos itself was said to have been spared. Yet even after a death blow such as this, the Minoans continued to survive in a small shape or form. For it seems that the Mycenaeans, albeit being the ones who had destroyed the Minoans completely, had perhaps been impressed by the Minoan civilization, their might and their wealth at their heights. For 2 palace settlements on the Isle of Crete, Knossos and Phaistos, were later rebuilt by the Mycenaeans, and in the Minoan architectural form no less. And as a result, this reconstruction has left us with the ruined palace settlements in the form that we see them today, as pictured here. But there are still some key differences between Minoan and Mycenaean architecture. For example, instead of being rebuilt as palace settlements specifically, Mycenaean structures like this were built more along the lines of a citadel. Large walled settlements, focusing around the epicenter created by a Mycenaean palace, with unfortified towns sitting outside of the citadel's walls. And what were these defences used for? Well, the Mycenaeans, like the Minoans that came before them, were not a unified political entity. Yes, they were culturally similar, much like the Minoans that came before them and the classical Greeks that we know and love that would come long after them. However, each of the Mycenaean sites scattered across the Aegean operated essentially as independent states, unified only by culture and perhaps religion. Another point of difference between the Minoans and the Mycenaeans, however, is that whilst with the Minoans, our information on how they administered their realms is quite lacking, with the Mycenaeans, perhaps due to them having an Indo-European language and therefore decipherable to us today, we have substantially more information on how the Mycenaean kingdoms were effectively governed. Perhaps one of the richest examples comes to us in the kingdom of Pylos, which was excavated in the southern Peloponnese region of Greece in 1939 by an archaeologist known as Carl Blegen. previously, the kingdom of Pylos had been thought only mythical, being named by Homer in his Iliad and later Odyssey, and was described as having been ruled over by a man known as Nestor, who was said to have lived in a large palace with many rooms. And it was here that clay tablets detailing the administration and economy of the kingdom of Pylos were also unearthed, giving a rare glimpse into the nitty-gritty of how Mycenaean society effectively functioned at its height, with Pylos being divided into 2 provinces, with each province being subdivided further into several districts apiece. The kingdom of Pylos has been found to have encompassed roughly 200 villages and towns, covering around 1,400 square kilometers in total, meaning that the kingdom of Pylos at its height was a mere 1 kilometer squared larger than the Faroe Islands we know today. And the tablets unearthed here give us a keyhole view into the social structure of Mycenaean kingdoms. At the top of this social pyramid sat the Wanax, or king. Beneath him were the Lauagetas, which loosely translates to as general or leader of the military. Below them came the bureaucratic classes, who oversaw the administration and governance of the palace and also any outlying settlements under the control of a Mycenaean kingdom, and of course below them you had the peasantry. And as with most ancient hierarchies, the further up the pyramid you were, the better a life you lived. In the context of the Mycenaeans, it appeared that the king, the military, and perhaps some of the bureaucratic class lived the most luxurious lifestyles, with excavations of grave sites in Mycenaean kingdoms revealing that those who lived in luxury were taller than their contemporaries among the peasantry, which suggests a much healthier diet than those of the peasantry who were said to have lived modestly in small houses in the countryside, with this class being full of herders, artisans, labourers and farmers, who often did not live in luxury like the king, the military and some of the bureaucrats. However, even among the peasantry it appeared there was still one more social divide, with the clay tablets discovered within Pylos listing craftsmen, herders and priestesses, for example, as the owners of private land, therefore making them a cut above the rest of the peasantry. And despite my use of the word peasantry, those in the lower echelons of Mycenaean society were not oppressed in the way that you would think of medieval peasants. For you see, the peoples in this category of Mycenaean society, so long as they paid their taxes, were left in relative peace. They farmed their plots, tended their vines and trees, raised livestock, and even contributed some labour to the palace, which might imply that some social mobility could have been possible within this societal structure. And those centred around the palace perhaps had some of the most important roles of all. For the palace not only functioned as a residence for royalty, but also functioned perhaps as a sort of primitive workhouse, where raw materials were funneled into the palace structure itself and left the palace once again as handcrafted products such as ceramics, jewellery and bronze tools. And this method of production meant that the palace was essentially an economic honeypot, with raw materials being funneled into the citadel itself, such as copper, tin, wheat, livestock, gold and jewels, and being reproduced into finely made tools and other products, ready to be bought and sold across the Mycenaean territories, and even further still beyond those borders. For around the time of the height of the Mycenaean civilization, the Mycenaeans would get some new neighbours in the form of the Hittite Empire, centred in Anatolia, mostly within the country that we now know today as the Republic of Turkey. And yes, these two civilizations, although trading partners and quite close ones at that, did come to blows every so often. Particularly, the Mycenaean kingdoms on the Anatolian mainland would from time to time come into conflict with the mighty Hittite Empire, Yet the fact that these Mycenaean kingdoms perhaps endured the presence of the Hittites in Anatolia suggests that the Mycenaeans in Anatolia were just valuable enough to act as an incentive to maintain the delicate trade network that ran throughout the eastern Mediterranean, with the Mycenaeans and the Hittites being two important cogs within this larger trade network that included more far-flung powers such as Egypt, Mesopotamia, and to keep track of this, of course, the Mycenaeans wrote down everything that went on within their economy, with the Wanax or king keeping a close eye on production and the intake of raw materials, with them coming into the palace mostly in the form of taxation. And taxation under the Mycenaeans is not how we know it today. Instead of taxes being taken in gold, silver, coin or any form of monetary currency, taxes were taken in raw materials, in bushels of wheat for example. So detailed are these economic records that some of the records found even claim that as much as 100,000 sheep had been brought under the watchful gaze of the palace administration system. Furthermore, these tablets even detail which chariots in the Mycenaean arsenal were fit for purpose or in need of repair, meaning that the Mycenaeans were effectively a well-oiled machine of a civilization, perhaps far more complex than the Minoans that came before them, making them a worthy rival and adversary for the other powers in the region during the Bronze Age. So join us next time as we uncover even more about Mycenaean society and how the Mycenaeans operated within a wider world among other great powers such as Egypt and the Hittites. And on a darker note, how the Mycenaeans in all their complexity, like many other civilizations in the region, would come crashing to the ground. I'm Lewis of the Grand Portfolio, and thank you for watching.